You know that moment when your phone stays quiet for hours, maybe even days, and you tell yourself you don't really mind. You wake up, go through your routine, make your food, sit in your room, and the silence feels normal. You don't feel pulled to check messages every few minutes. You don't feel pressured to reply to anyone. And most of the time, it feels calm, peaceful even. But then, every now and then, a small feeling shows up when you least expect it. Maybe when you see people laughing together. Maybe when something good happens and there's no one you feel like telling. It looks like you enjoy being alone, but sometimes it feels like there's a quiet space where something should be, and that's where this becomes more complicated than it first seems. For a long time, you might have wondered if this says something about you. You might have compared yourself to people who always seem surrounded by friends, always in group chats, always making plans. And quietly, you may have asked yourself a question you never say out loud. Is something wrong with me? Because the world makes it seem like everyone should have a big circle, like being social all the time is the normal way to live. So when your life feels quieter, smaller, and more private, it can start to feel like you're somehow behind. But here's something gentle to hold on to. Having few friends, or even none for a period of time, doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you're hard to like. It doesn't mean you're missing something important inside. Sometimes it just means your life has moved in a quieter direction. Sometimes it means you've learned to live in your own space, in your own rhythm. And there are more people living this way than you think. They just don't talk about it as much. What makes this interesting is that there's a difference between being alone and feeling lonely. From the outside, those two things can look exactly the same. A person sitting by themselves, walking alone, spending most of their time in their own space. But inside, the experience can be completely different. You can be alone and feel calm. You can feel safe. You can feel like your mind finally has room to breathe. And at the same time, someone else can be surrounded by people all day and still feel like no one truly sees them. So the real story isn't always about how many people are around you. It's about how connected you feel when you are with them. Here's the part most people miss. The brain doesn't just look for excitement or fun, it looks for safety. If being around people ever made you feel judged, ignored, misunderstood, or drained, your mind remembers that, not in a loud way, just quietly. It keeps those moments stored somewhere in the background, and over time it starts to connect peace with solitude. Being alone feels simpler. No pressure to talk when you don't want to. No pressure to laugh at things you don't find funny. No need to explain yourself over and over again. So slowly, without you even noticing, your world becomes quieter. This is where it gets confusing, because you can enjoy being alone and still feel a small ache once in a while. You can like your space and still wonder what it would feel like to have someone who understands you deeply. Both feelings can live in the same place at the same time. You can feel calm during the day and a little empty at night. You can feel strong on your own and still wish, quietly, that you had someone to share things with. That doesn't mean you're confused, it just means you're human. When you spend a lot of time by yourself, something else begins to happen. You start getting used to your inner world. You think more. You notice small details. You replay conversations in your head. You try to understand people, situations, and yourself. Your mind becomes a place you know very well. And over time, that inner space can start to feel more familiar than social spaces. You know how to be yourself there. You don't feel watched. You don't feel judged. You don't feel like you need to perform. This is where it gets psychologically interesting. People who live with smaller social circles often start to build a quiet understanding of themselves, not in a loud, confident way that others can easily see, but in a steady, private way. You begin to notice what drains you. You begin to notice what gives you peace. You learn how certain people make you feel, and because of that, you become more careful. Not closed off, just careful. There's a reason this can make it harder to connect sometimes. When you're used to being alone, your mind gets comfortable in that space. It becomes predictable. You know what to expect from your day. You know how things will feel. And the brain likes what feels familiar. It likes what feels safe. So even when you meet new people, there can be a quiet hesitation inside you, not because you don't want connection, but because connection can feel uncertain, and uncertainty can feel heavy. Here's something most people don't talk about. When you don't have many people in your life, you learn how to carry your emotions on your own. When something goes wrong, you deal with it quietly. When you feel sad, you sit with it. When you feel stressed, you think it through. At first, that can feel lonely, but over time, it can also make you stronger in a quiet way. You learn how to calm yourself down. You learn how to sit with your feelings instead of running from them, and that changes how you move through the world. This is where it gets even more interesting. Some people feel uncomfortable when they're alone with their thoughts. Silence makes them restless. They need noise, people, or movement around them. But if you've spent a lot of time by yourself, you may have slowly learned how to sit in silence without panicking. You may not even notice it anymore. It's just part of your life. And that ability to be alone with your thoughts is something not everyone has. But even with all of that, there can still be moments when the distance feels very real. You see people making plans easily. You hear about group memories and shared experiences. You notice how naturally some people seem to belong somewhere. And a quiet question might show up in your mind. Not loud, not dramatic, just soft. Where do I fit? And sometimes that question stays with you longer than you expect. This is why having few or no friends can feel peaceful and heavy at the same time. Peaceful because your life is quieter, simpler, and less demanding. Heavy because there is still a part of you that wants to be seen and understood. And there's a reason this feels so mixed. The part of you that enjoys solitude is real, but the part of you that still wants connection is just as real. They don't cancel each other out. They exist together. Sometimes having few friends isn't about pushing people away. It's about being careful. Careful about who you trust. Careful about who you open up to. Maybe you've been misunderstood before. Maybe you've felt invisible even when you were around people. Maybe you've tried to share parts of yourself and felt like they didn't land the way you hoped. When that happens enough times, a quiet part of you starts protecting your space, and protection can look like distance from the outside. But distance doesn't always mean you don't care. In fact, sometimes it means you care more. It means you don't want shallow conversations. You don't want forced connections. You don't want to pretend to be someone you're not just to fit in. So instead of having many small connections, you end up having fewer. Sometimes none for a while. Not because you don't need people, but because you're waiting for something that feels real. There's also something else happening underneath it all. When you spend a lot of time alone, you become very aware of your own thoughts. You notice patterns. You notice how certain memories stay with you. You notice how your mind moves from one idea to another. And over time, you may start to feel different from others, like you're observing the world from a small distance, not fully inside of it, but not fully inside it either. And that can make it harder to feel like you belong, because belonging often feels loud and fast and easy for other people, but for you, it might feel slow and quiet and uncertain, and there's a reason for that. When your inner world is deep and active, you don't just connect with anyone easily. You look for something you can't always explain, a sense of comfort, a sense of being understood without having to say too much. So the psychology of people with few or no friends isn't really about being rejected or forgotten. Sometimes it's about personality. Sometimes it's about past experiences. Sometimes it's about how your mind learned to protect your peace. And sometimes it's just a season of life that slowly formed around you without you realizing it. There may have been times when you tried to connect more, times when you reached out, times when you hoped something would grow, and when it didn't, a part of you quietly stepped back, not in anger, not in sadness, just in silence. And over time, that silence became normal. But being alone doesn't mean your life is empty, it just means your world is quieter. And in that quiet, there is space. Space to think, space to feel yourself in ways noise doesn't always allow. You learn things about yourself that you might not have noticed in a louder life. You learn what matters to you. You learn what you can handle. You learn what you need to feel calm. Some people feel most alive in crowds. Some people feel most like themselves in stillness. Neither is wrong, neither is better. They're just different ways of being human. And if your life feels quieter than others, it doesn't mean you failed at something. It may just mean your mind found a different kind of peace, even if that peace comes with a small, quiet